Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is the movie of What If Naruto and Kushina Becomes Evil. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. It was a warm summer day in the village of Uzu. One Kushina Uzumaki was happily enjoying her morning breakfast with her family. The young redhead wolfed down her scrambled eggs, making her father chuckle and say, "Slow down. Your food isn't going to run away." The young girl puffed her cheeks and said, "Screw that, Pops, I need the protein. If I'm going to be the best kunoichi in the world, I'll be so famous and strong the cages themselves will be at my mercy." Both of her parents burst out laughing at her statement, her mother mumbling audibly, "That's our daughter with her pure Uzumaki spirit." Without warning, their child snatched up their meals too and gobbled them down. Kushina belched and said, "More food please," causing both of her parents to sweat drop, wondering how such a small girl ate so much but gained no fat. None whatsoever. Kushina ate and ate and ate, but never gained so much as a pound. From what the doctors told them, if the nutrients weren't going to their child's developing they were going to her muscles, which was astonishing to say the least. Even though she had a ravenous appetite, the girl had a seemingly endless amount of stamina. At the Uzu Academy, Kushina would train all day. Even when her classmates collapsed from exhaustion, she would yell at them and call them names, usually involving lazy asses. Then there was the class spars. During a battle royale amongst the students, at least 20 boys ganged up on the girl. Kushina knocked them all flat inside of a minute. After that, she lorded over them like a queen, as the boys often asked her on dates and fought over her attention, which earned lots of laughs from the teachers. During written tests, Kushina was no slouch either. Once a teacher deliberately gave the young redhead a test designed for Chunin to test her mental prowess. She finished it in less than 5 minutes and said to him, "Give me a hard one next time." Needless to say, their child was a natural-born prodigy who put even Chunin and some Jonin to shame. They couldn't have been any more proud. Their time together, however, was interrupted as the smell of smoke entered their nostrils. "Is the stove still on?" Kushina asked her parents. They both checked, but nothing was amiss. Suddenly, a part of the dining room wall exploded, the force sending the family to the floor. Kushina coughed from the dust in the air. When it settled, she saw that which was hell, Uzu was in flames. It was all so surreal. When she helped her mother water their garden that morning, everything was fine. The rolling whirlpools surrounding their island village continued their eternal defense, the Uzu Andu performing their daily patrols like clockwork. It was a normal day. So how was this happening? Kushina saw mothers defending their children against shinobi, wearing headbands from Iwa, Kiri, and Kumo. The redhead's eyes widened in horror. The invading shinobi were lighting people's homes on fire. A group of small children were executed, their throats slashed open. The bodies of men, women, and children tossed into raging flames. As happening amidst the slaughter, the Uzu shinobi, Anbu, and kunoichi fighting to the last, taking as many of the enemy with them as they could. The young girl looked at her parents to tell them what was happening. Instead, she saw they were already dead, having bleed out from the shrapnel of the explosion. The redhead stood in stunned silence, tears streaming from her eyes. She slumped to her knees as she was overcome by grief, the screams of the dying and tortured filling her ears. She clenched her fists so hard that her nails dug into her skin and drew. From the hole in the dining room wall appeared a Chunin from Iwa, looking down on Kushina. "Kinda young for my tastes, but still, quite the cutie," spoke the shinobi in a filled tone. In a slow, almost mechanical way, Kushina turned to him, a blank look adorning her face. She looked up at him, her violet eyes boring into him. He took a step back from her. He had seen looks of fury, despair, desperation, silent promises of death, and more. But this girl was looking through him, like his existence meant nothing to her. That dull and broken look in her eyes made him nervous. He subconsciously reached for a kunai in fear of her. Before he could even react, she had pounced upon him. A curdling scream echoed outside the household. Below, 2 Jonin heard it. One said that sounded like Higa. His partner nodded and replied, "Yeah, let's check it out. Might be an Anbu hiding in there." The two leapt into the home through the hole in the wall. They looked down on the floor and saw a truly horrific sight. Standing over the deceased Chunin was a young Uzumaki girl. She looked to be about 12, her mouth and face drenched in crimson. They looked down and noted that one Higa's throat was ripped open and his neck had prominent teeth marks. Did she rip out his throat with her teeth?" asked one Jonin as his face turned green. Kushina leaned down and picked up the dead Chunin's kunai. The 2 Jonin prepared themselves for her attack. A tense silence filled the air as the 3 stood still, anticipating the other's movement. The second they blinked, the young girl was already on them and in quick succession cut open their throat. The last clear thought the two had was, so fast is she a monster. With it they collapsed to the floor dead. Kushina stood over them, kunai in hand, her mind on overdrive as her survival instincts kicked in. Her only hope to live and get justice for her clan was to go to Konoha and tell them what happened. In a burst of speed, she leapt out of her beloved home and dashed across the streets. She ran faster than she ever had in her life. Her body's chakra outwardly flared and formed solid chains, a unique attribute of her people. From the invaders' perspectives, a blur of red streaked across the island village, cutting its way through scores of shinobi, splashed about as their throats were cut and heads were ripped off by whipping chains as the blur sped by. Many fled in panic, trying to get out of the way of this killer phenomenon. The last remaining survivors of Uzu saw this as a miracle, sent by the heavens themselves. With their spirits and morale lifted up, they fought even harder in a last attempt to buy time for some of the remaining children to be evacuated. No matter what, even if only a single child survived, the Uzumaki clan would live to fight again in the future. Meanwhile, Kushina continued moving at unnatural speed, cutting apart anything in her way. Her movements flowed like water, her body felt lighter, and her eyes tracked every single target as she butchered them as she raced toward the North Point, a place where one could safely swim to the mainland and back without fear of the whirlpools dragging you to a watery grave. She huffed and panted as she landed on Akiri-chun's shoulders, then snapped his neck with her thighs, then leapt off and continued to the North Point. At last she reached it and leapt into the water, beginning to swim to shore. She swam and swam, not looking back at the destruction, for fear of being spotted and followed. She cried as she swam, her tears mixing with the water, her mind and heart filled with rage and hate for the villages responsible. But how did they arrive? There were 3 ways to Uzu. You could enter via the North Point, or a secret underground tunnel, or via a specially made ship that had special seals to protect and navigate the ever-present whirlpools. But the only way they could have arrived in force was through the tunnel. How did they know? She shrugged off her musing as she made it to shore, panting tiredly from both her killing spree and the long swim. Nearby, a young fisherman spotted her and slowly approached. "Hey, you okay, kid? You're one of those Uzumakis, right? My name's Tazuna." Kushina looked at him, her eyes bleary from exhaustion. "Please, help me," she managed to choke out before collapsing. Some days later, Kushina sat in Tazuna's home, a warm blanket covering head as she sipped a mug full of hot chocolate. In the time she spent there, she spoke very little because she was still in shock, though was recovering quickly. From what little she had spoken, he got the message Uzu was destroyed. He immediately sent a letter to Konoha alerting them of the situation, and a monkey summon arrived telling them that the Sandaime himself was coming to get Kushina. While Tazuna didn't know anyone personally from Uzu, the island's destruction still grieved him, but he was grateful that this young girl had survived such an ordeal. The two sat together expecting the Sandaime to arrive at any moment. At long last, the aging Hokage entered the small home, a grim expression on his face. Tatsuna chose to leave so they might speak alone. Hiruzen silently thanked the civilian for the gesture as he sat down across from the young girl. Kushina sipped from her mug and mumbled, "It's gone. Uzu, my clan, all of it, gone." Hiruzen gave her a sympathetic look as he replied in a solemn tone, "I know. We didn't realize Uzu was attacked until after it was gone." She nodded in grim understanding, though asked how did they know how to get to Uzu in force. The Hokage shrugged as he replied, "We don't know yet." The girl scowled at that as she glared at him through her unkempt hair, then spoke, "I saw their headbands. It was a coalition force of Kiri, Iwa, and Kumo shinobi." The aging Hokage's eyes narrowed for a brief moment, then he relaxed and spoke in an even tone, "Very well, I shall make inquiries," and he was interrupted by the young girl screaming out, "Inquiries? That's all I know. What I saw in the shinobi villages that did it marched down to them and razed their villages to the ground." Hiruzen shook his head and replied, "Be reasonable. We can't go to war with 3 major villages. Even with Suna backing us, it will be a bath no one can afford. Besides, we can't go to villages that might not be involved." At that, the girl raised an eyebrow in suspicion. "Might not be involved, there's more to this." The Sandaime coughed into his sleeve and spoke, "Since you're the only confirmed survivor of Uzu, I need you to sign this." He placed a pen and paper on the table in front of her. She looked at the paper in suspicion, reading over the fine print. "I refuse," she said simply, already seeing this as a means of looting the corpse that is her village. Hiruzen blanched at that as he spoke in a shocked tone, but, please reconsider. We need to find Uzu's sacred treasures before the enemy they predate the Rikudu Senin think of." He was interrupted once again by the girl, who said stiffly, "I said I refuse. I will not allow anyone to loot Uzu. Besides, those treasures aren't meant for mortal hands, not even for my people's hands." Hiruzen's eyes narrowed more visibly this time, which she easily caught. The aging Hokage then sighed and spoke, trying to keep his voice even and calm. "Very well, I'm afraid you must come with me to Konoha." The young Uzumaki raised an eyebrow and asked, "Why should I? Maybe I want to stay and wave so I can be close to home." The last part she spoke with the desire to protect her former home. The Sandaime shook his head and replied to her, "Not possible. We need an Uzumaki to replace Mito Uzumaki when she passes away." Deep down in the back of the redhead's mind, a series of warning bells rang in her head, all resounding the same thing: do not trust him. Kushina weighed her options in silent contemplation. She had a gut feeling that if she refused, he would insist on her coming with him, and if she refused Agiiden, then he would attempt to placate and convince her with some kind of bribe. "Sorry, Hokage-sama, but I refuse," she spoke in order to test his reaction. The Sandaime implored with her, "Please, Kushina, you must. Konoha needs an Uzumaki to contain Kyuubi. Without it, Konoha would be defenseless. The village your clan helped build would be destroyed." That last statement made the young Kushina bristle in anger. Helped build the Uzumaki? Didn't help build Konoha. They did build it themselves. The Uzumaki clan laid the foundation and creation of Konoha. The Senju established the shinobi system afterwards. She then decided to refuse again to see how much Hiruzen really wanted her to come with him, and once again refused. He promptly asked, "Is there anything I can say or give you to come with me to Konoha?" That was the last sign that Kushina needed to confirm there was more to this. It was conjecture, but deep down she couldn't help but notice something and decided to speak. There might be. You know, it's truly horrible what happened to my clan and village. I can't help but wonder how so many quickly and quietly bypassed the village's natural defenses and seals. The Sandem looked somewhat relieved, then answered, indeed. I'm sorry to say, but I think Uzu's defense wasn't that strong. Unknown to him, she had caught him in her trap. He does know something. In anger at this, something in her mind snapped as her mind came upon an epiphany. Uzu had no grudges or bad between Kiri due to the ever-subservient Terumi clan serving and protecting the Uzumaki clan, nor with Kumo, whom respected the Uzumaki clan due to their help in training the Sandame Reikage Z to be strong enough to fight the Hachibai to a draw. Uzu had some bad with Io, but it was over a minor incident involving trade, not shinobi matters. In Kushina's young but highly intelligent mind, she realized that Konoha had the most to gain from Uzu's destruction. Her psyche fractured in rage. She wasn't wanted because she survived. She was wanted because Konoha needed her to keep their ace, a Kyuubi Jinchuriki. In that moment she had a very strong feeling that Konoha orated it all somehow, and she was going to find out everything there was to know, and punish those responsible. Fine. She relented and made a list of essential demands. Her own private home, all rights of everything Uzumaki related were hers by default, attending the academy to be a kunoichi, etc. Though the Uzumaki rights irked the Sandame somewhat. After that was done, Kushina bid Tezuna goodbye and thanked him for his hospitality. As she walked with the Hokage and his Anbu guard, the young redhead swore an oath to herself in silence to find who was responsible for Uzu's destruction. Then she would grind them down and break them apart a piece at a time. Then she would destroy their home village. A dark gleam shimmered in her eyes as she licked her lips in excitement. 2 months later, with a loud thud, a young boy fell to the ground. A foot stomped on his face. Said foot belonged to one Kushina who was engaged in a series of academy spars. She was the #1 student since to her, the academy's tests were little more than kindergarten stuff. And when it came to spars, well, is that all you less bastards have? I've known puppies that can put up more of a fight. Maybe I should dress you boys in cute pink dresses, Kushina yelled out, causing a surprising number of boys to look at her with hearts in their eyes. One Suma Yuzuka thought out loud, those boys must be masochists. Her point was proven further as Kushina sat on the back of her victim and the boys started fawning over her, offering their lunches, allowances, and more. Some were brave enough to ask her for a date, earning them a painful squeeze to their testicles and a threat of castration from the redhead. In the background, Sum couldn't help but admire Kushina. Kushina was beautiful, strong, smart, and had all the boys dancing to whatever tune she wanted. She couldn't help but respect her classmate. Despite Kushina's losses, she never showed weakness. If anyone insulted her clan, she punched their lights out. With a sigh, she decided to feed her pup who was pawing at her leg for food. Meanwhile, during Sum's musing, Kushina was ruling the male students with an iron fist. She noticed the only boy who wasn't trying to get her attention was some Minato kid. She spoke with him a few times. He was a somewhat above average student but not really noteworthy. Plus she noticed his senju-like mindset, which made her nauseous just thinking about. It was common knowledge to members of the Uzumaki clan that if you put in Uzumaki and Senju and Uchiha in the same room, it would only end in. She wasn't sure what happened between her clan and the other two, but it was so bad that it became in Uzumaki's first instinct to hate both Senjus and Uchihas. She smiled knowing that graduation was tomorrow. The higher rank she achieved, the more classified information she could gather. Her ears twitched as she glanced over her shoulder and saw an Anbu hiding on a nearby rooftop. Lately she had noticed they were observing her nearly every day. Seems the old Hokage is having me tailed. Not surprising given my soon-to-be status as Jinchuriki. You want to play cloak and dagger with me? Oh, I'll play all right, she thought maliciously in her mind, then spoke to her slave. Indentured servants, bring me a Karaku ramen. Now, your mistress demands it, and someone fan me, it is hot out here. With a shout, a number of the boys ran to the ramen stand to fetch any kind of ramen sold there, while a second group used their shirts and whatever else they could find to cool the Uzumaki airs, making one Hanami Hyuga sweat drop and wonder how such a brutish girl had so many boys do her bidding. A week later, Kushina sat alone in her apartment staring at a board filled with pictures, notes, theories connected by red string. She dubbed it the Uzu conspiracy. She glanced at a picture of her Uzun at the top of the board with a note that said Sandame Hokage, orated Uzu attack. Then she glanced downward to one of Jiraiya, which also had a note, self-proclaimed frog sage, disgusting pervert, Sanon, connection to Uzu attack. Then she looked a little to the right at a picture of Minato, the note saying orphan. No clear connection to Senju clan if at all. Caught Jiraiya's interest. Why, she stared at the board as she snacked on a bag of chips. She knew, deep down she knew that almost everything that happened in Konoha was somehow tied to the Uzu attack. She had nothing but theories and assumptions, but kept feeling that there was a skeleton in the closet just waiting to be found. She glanced at a picture of Mito Uzumaki shot in Kyuubi Jinchuriki, distraught from clan's demise, loyal to clan and family principles, kept in dark by Hokage. Her contemplating was interrupted by a knocking on her door. She sighed angrily and went to answer, asking in a frustrated and rude tone, "The hell do you want?" Her visitor was one Mikoto Uchiha. Despite her heritage as an Uchiha, the redhead grew fond of the girl. She wasn't an elitist or had a holier-than-thou attitude Uchihas had. "Hello to you too, Kushinachan." Me and the girls Hanami and Sum were going out shopping. We were hoping you could join us, asked the kind and gentle girl. The redhead was genuinely touched by the offer but had to refuse. Can't. I'm busy with something. Makoto puffed her cheeks out and replied with some tears in her eyes, nonsense, you always shut yourself up in your apartment for whatever reason, Kushina. I am sorry about the loss of your clan and home. I know you're still hurting. I can't even begin to understand how you feel since I've never experienced the loss and pain you suffered. But please at least try to have fun once in a while. The redhead glanced downwards at seeing Makoto's teary-eyed expression. Her and those other two girls were the closest things to friends she had. She sighed, then scratched her cheek and asked, can you keep a secret? The Uchiha girl sniffled and gave a sharp nod. The redhead ushered the Uchiha inside and walked her to the living room area. The raven-haired girl's jaw dropped as she muttered, this has been what you're working on. Kushina answered her with a curt yep. Makoto stared at the board for some time. She stared intently for some minutes before speaking. I see. So you think Konoha was involved in your clan's destruction? The violet-eyed girl bluntly answered, I don't think. I know, and I'm gonna find the evidence to prove it. Makoto could only nod in understanding. Thanks for showing me. I swear on my eyes to never speak of this outside this room. Kushina smiled, knowing that an Uchiha's most solemn oath is placed on their eyes. Good. I think I'll come. I need some new clothes anyway. At that, the Uchiha girl let out a loud yay. 1 year later, Kushina was being carried away from Konoha by a team of Kumo shinobi. At first glance one would think she was being kidnapped. That was not the case. Inwardly she was maniacally giggling at her fortune. She deliberately allowed them to take her so she could escape Konoha, kill these idiots, fake her death, then covertly investigate the Hokage's office. It was perfect. The next time these Kumo-nin stopped would be when she would strike. She wasn't about to let this opportunity go to waste. Then, it was a bungled as she saw one Minato kill her kidnappers. That idiot, he is ruining everything. I've been trying to escape that cesspool Konoha for months and he just ruins by killing Kumo, Jonin. She noted that he managed to kill Jonin from Kumo, one of the more militaristic shinobi villages. A light bulb flashed over her head. She might have lost one opportunity, but a new one presented itself. At first she decided to become Hokage to run Konoha to the ground while investigating any and all classified information. This plan was dashed to pieces because she was a foreign Kunoichi. It infuriated her that she was beaten by such a simple technicality. But if she had a puppet as Hokage, then she could manipulate him to do whatever she wanted. It was perfect. All she had to do was mold that Namikaze brat into her yes man. A faint smile stretched across her lips as he picked her up in a bridal carry and spoke, thank goodness you're okay. I followed the strands of your hair. I would have recognized such beautiful hair anywhere. Kushina mentally groaned. Those Kumo-nin did tug and pull on her hair when she faked putting up a fight. She hadn't expected that it would lead this idiot to her, and he was already flirting with her to boot. She had the desire to rip off his lower jaw but refrained from doing so since he could prove useful to her. With her best acting skill available, she faked her embarrassment of him complimenting her hair. She hoped that this guy would be gullible enough to handle. And as luck would have it, he was. Years later, it had been years since her abduction. It took some time, but she finally stamped out any resistance in Minato and made him her puppet, and now he was the Yondaime Hokage. Unknown to all of Konoha, Minato didn't develop his two signature jutsu. It was all the Uzumaki woman's doing. The Nidaime attempted to create the Hiraishin, but the formula was left incomplete. Kushina finished it and handed off a copy to her husband to make him a Hokage candidate. She then formed the Rasengan, which was inspired by a Baijudama, courtesy of her tenant to whom she had a respectable relationship. Kushina dearly missed Mito. She was fortunate to visit the elder Uzumaki before she passed. She could number the visits on a single hand. No doubt hers, and kept them separate to the best of his ability in case they learned something they weren't supposed to. Speaking of which, the redhead finally acquired what she was looking for after all these years thanks to Minato. She found even more than she bargained for, much to her maniac glee. Turns out Konoha had a number of dirty secrets that dates back to the Shodaime Hashirama. Turns out Hashirama Senju deliberately gave away the Jinchuriki as weapons of mass destruction to incite warfare amongst the nations. The whole piece through harmony was nothing but lies and hypocrisy. It got better. Turns out the real reason why so many clans were allowed to join Konoha was simply for military power from line capitalization. Only one's able to trump Konoha in line diversity is Kiri. And then she found the proof she so desperately desired and admittedly obsessed over. As it turns out, Konoha was behind Uzu's destruction. The Sandaime covertly hired various small groups of ninja behind their respective cages' backs, then supplemented them with his own forces using stolen headbands. Using information they gathered over the years, they discovered the hidden tunnel to covertly enter Uzu and take them by surprise by hitting the Uzukage Tower first. The purpose for this genocide appalled her. The main idea was to find a survivor or survivors of Uzu, take them to Konoha and have them live there to instill loyalty in them and keep a means of containing the Kyuubi, and eventually recreating their own Uzumaki clan. She was both angry and elated. This damning evidence would destroy Konoha's reputation. The village would be outcasts. Even the fire daimyo would immediately run for cover. She giggled to herself in glee, though it was interrupted by one Minato who asked Kushina-sama, how should I punish the academy teacher who was inappropriately touching students? Kushina sighed in frustration. Minato was decent enough in a fight. But in the bedroom was a total lout. Barely lasted 3 minutes before he was finished. No big loss really. She was pregnant anyway. A boy as well who could help repopulate her clan. She already had selected a small number of women loyal to her to aid in this. An unregistered genin team she handpicked and trained herself. When it came to law and politics, Minato was totally useless. He couldn't handle the simplest matters without needing someone to hold his hand. But that left her more room to maneuver, so that was a plus. How do you think he molested little girls? Castration and life without parole. Kushina spoke in a bored tone. The faux Hokage sweated a little at that and asked his wife, isn't that a little extreme? That earned a well-aimed kunai thrown onto the desk just between his fingers, making him gulp nervously. A dark look crossed the Uzumaki woman's face as she answered, do what I say. I made you what you are, Minato. I made you. I can dispose of you whenever I want. Or should I tell Konoha the fraud you are? The blonde man shrank in his seat. He was aware he meant nothing to her. He learned far too late though. By the time she was pregnant, she had complete control of him. She had enough dirt on him to ruin his career, make every female in Konoha desire to kill him, and make him the laughingstock of the elemental nations. She both literally and figuratively had him by the S. While crying anime tears, he did as she wanted. It was one bad thing after another. Before he realized her true nature, she had tricked him into enacting a set of laws that put a stranglehold on the civilian and elder council's political power, slowly suffocating the democracy that the Senju brothers put into place. By the time his sensei Jiraiya warned him about this, the damage had already been done. He prayed day after day to Kami that he would be free of this horrible creature that spat on the will of fire and everything Konoha stands for. With a sigh, Kushina entered an adjacent room where her 4 students, her best friends, Hanami, Tsume, and Mikoto, and her big sister figure waited. Hello everyone, so glad of you to be here. She spoke in a sickly sweet voice. You wouldn't call us all together unless it was important, spoke Mikoto, who had bonded with Kushina the most. You're right, I finally found Konoha's long-buried secrets. With what I know, I could spark a 4th shinobi war within a week. This makes me dangerous. Minato, Jiraiya, Hiruzen, and Danzo all know this. During my birthing of my child, the likelihood of an accident happening to me is high. In the event I vanish, I want all of you to raise my son. They were all stunned at this. You can't be serious. You're the evil Uzumaki. You castrated and mutilated your victims, then joked about it the next day. You punted the Raikage across a battlefield like a soccer. You killed more ninja than the entire Anbu division ever has since founding, yelled Tsunade out in surprise. Kushina chuckled at being reminded of her fearsome reputation. All true. But that was when I wasn't pregnant. They all sighed, knowing that part was true. With some reluctance they agreed, knowing that Kushina wasn't wrong about the possibilities of her vanishing. With a smile and nod, she bid them goodbye and went back into her husband's office. Minato looked up at her, wondering where she went. He could tell from the look on her face she wasn't going to answer. So instead he asked her, Kushina-sama, I was thinking about asking Sensei about being godfather to our child. In an instant, Kushina kicked the chair out from under the faux Hokage, then planted her foot on his throat, threatening to crush his larynx. Hell no, I will not have that useless pervert be anywhere near my son. Jiraiya serves no purpose. He just spends his days whoring, peeping, and writing porn. If you ever ask me that again, then I'll get the idea you're as perverted as him. And I'll crush your throat. With it, she lifted her foot off his throat and marched down the hallway of the Hokage Tower. She pulled a set of letters out from between her gracious S. These were letters from her spy network she spent the better part of her career building up. It stretched all across the nations. Her most recent letters were from one Mei Terumi, whom was completely and utterly devoted to the fallen Uzumaki clan. She got another one from her associate from Kumo, whose brother is the Hachibai Jinchuriki. Another was from one Onoki, the Tsuchikage. They didn't like each other, but they still kept their dislike of each other aside since they exchanged good business. She hadn't received anything from Snow, Suna, or Aim. Aim she still had problems expanding into. Aim was quite reclusive. She had a feeling there was something behind that. Whatever it was, if it got in her way, she would eliminate it. She grunted as she felt a wet feeling trickling down her leg. Her water had broken. Hours later, Kushina was pushing as hard as she could, trying to give birth to her child. She had fought against cage-level ninja, and none of those fights required even 50% of her full power. She was threatening to crush Minato's hand in her grip. He was pounding the side of the bed in pain as his fingers made several popping sounds. While Kushina was screaming, she was also plotting. Everything was going according to plan, and Kyuubi was waiting and ready. The plan was simple. Kushina would seal half of her tenant's chakra into her child and keep the rest inside her. It was a flawless plan, until a masked maniac decided to drop in and bungle it all. Everything was a blur onwards. Everything moved in fast forward. She barely registered what was happening. First, that masked idiot took her child, and threatened to kill her baby no less. She was tied down with her clothes in tatters in a weird S&M fashion with chains. Her friend Kyuubi was put under a Sharingan genjutsu, and now here she was with a gaping hole in her stomach. Minato was in the process of performing the Reaper Death Seal to seal half of Kyuubi into her child. So that was one thing that went right. She then whispered to her child, my son, my baby boy, you must live on. I swear, somehow, someway I will find you. Please, don't let other manipulate you. You shall bear mine and our clan's grudge. You will be the vanguard of our righteous vengeance. As her puppet Minato passed away from the Shinigami, taking his soul, The red-haired woman collapsed, fading in and out of consciousness. As his vision blurred, she saw Jiraiya and Hiruzen appear. She heard tidbits of their conversation. From what she registered, she realized they were going to put her son in a controlled environment to manipulate him, and Jiraiya was going to usurp her delicately created spy network. She coughed and glared at them. She wouldn't leave her child. She wouldn't. I will survive, she screamed out with a maniac gleam in her eyes as they flashed crimson. Using the last of her remaining Biju chakra, she mended the gaping hole in her belly. With the last of her strength used up, she passed out. Unknown to the Sannin and Sandaime, this change of fate would shake the elemental nations to the core and flip it upside down. Somewhere far away, a lone figure wandered about the nations. The figure was feminine in nature as she glanced over to the general direction of Konoha. It seems something interesting is happening. I look forward to it. It has been nearly 6 years since the Kyuubi attack. Since that time, Hiruzen Sarutobi has worked hard to undo everything Kushina had done to sabotage Konoha's democracy. Jiraiya was hard at work integrating himself into Kushina's ingenious spy network. Unknown to them, they created more trouble than they repaired. The Shinobi Academy was reduced to almost nothing. The curriculum was 70% academic and only 30% physical, and not a single one of those lessons focused on or even mentioned the harsh realities of being a shinobi. If that wasn't enough, it was getting to the point civilians had a say in shinobi matters. The spy network was no better off. It spanned across the nations, capable of reaching even the daimyo courts. But now it was, in short, reduced to almost nothing within the first year of the Sannin being in charge. Finally, there was the matter of the resident Jinchuriki, whom they were already attempting to manipulate. Hiruzen placed a gag order on the populace of Konoha, though in the case of the Hyugas, Inuzukas, and even a small portion of Uchihas, they had to cram it down their throats just to shut them up. The Yamanakas, Akamichis, and Naras were also vocal about it. It took a lot of effort to shut them all up. The Iburames briefly announced their dislike of this since it was immoral and illogical. Hiruzen started by striking all records of Uzu from the history books and academy curriculum. He also managed to placate the Fire Daimyo enough to get some of the other villages to do the same. Thus far, Kiri, despite being in a state of unrest, vehemently refused to do so. Kumo refused to forget an honorable clan of kindred spirits. Hiruzen sighed. Even from beyond the grave, Uzu was still a thorn in Konoha's side. The Uzumaki clan was trouble since day one. Even today, he hasn't heard the end of them. He still occasionally receives reports about possible Uzumaki descendants or survivors. Speaking of descendants, somewhere in Konoha, Naruto was left bleeding in an alley after being viciously beaten once again by a group of civilians who sought their pound of flesh. The young blonde coughed up as he clutched something tightly to his. As he tried to get up, he saw in his blurred field of vision a woman in a regal-looking kimono with silvery long hair. The thing he noticed most were the protrusions on the top of her head. She tilted her head to the side as she gazed at him, looking down at him in mild interest as she knelt down to his level. She then spoke to him. "So you can see me, you must be something special." The blonde sat up and asked, "Who are you?" The woman answered with a dull expression on her face, "I doubt you would know who I am. You may address me as Kaguya Otsutsuki. I already know who you are. I've been following you for some years now." He tilted his head and asked her, "Why haven't I seen you till now?" She answered bluntly, "Because I didn't want to. The reason why I chose now was because I was curious as to what you wanted so badly that Yo7 would steal for it." A somewhat ashamed look appeared on his face as he presented the item. It was a children's ABCs book. "You stole that of all things, was it? Because you wanted to learn to read?" Kaguya asked, somewhat surprised. The boy nodded as he replied, "Yes. I want to start the academy in a few years, but I don't know how to read." Kaguya gave him a sympathetic look. She had sensed that something interesting was happening in Konoha, so she stuck around in this cesspool of a village to witness it. She had found that it was centered around this child. She thought she'd be bored at first, but noticed that no matter what, the boy continued to survive. He survived mobs, starvation, the elements of the weather, disease, and more. So she decided to stick around and wait till an appropriate time to reveal herself, then judge his worth. Such a shame. Poor child. Denied even the most basic of skills. If your mother were here, then she'd murder these people. His interest was piqued as he asked her, "You knew my mother?" The silver-haired woman traced her fingernail across her lip as she replied, "Only by reputation." Her name was whispered amongst frightened genin. She was often called a monster due to her brutality and cruelty. She was so cruel to her enemies she earned the nickname the Evil Uzumaki. The name further caught his interest. "Uzumaki, so my name actually means something?" he asked with stars in his eyes. "Of course it means something. It is the name of the small but fierce Uzumaki clan." She spoke, prompting him to leap to his feet, forgetting the pain in his body as he yelled, "I'm part of a clan too." She nodded as she replied, "Indeed. I'm sorry to say, but that is all I shall reveal. The rest you must discover on your own." She was about to walk away when all of a sudden the boy stepped in front of her and said, "I'm not letting you leave. I can't do this on my own. I need help. No one ever helps me. All they ever do is lie to me and hurt me." She raised an eyebrow as she asked, "Really? And how do you know I am not lying?" The blonde smirked as he answered, "Call it a sixth sense. But I have always been able to tell when someone is lying. I can tell that you've done bad things in the past. But you're not a bad person. Admit it, you've been following me because you need me as much as I need you. You were just afraid of your past sins." She scratched the side of her head in contemplation. He wasn't wrong. She was indeed afraid of her past for various reasons. Could she have been lying to herself and was seeking a chance at a redemption? She let out a small sound, then spoke. "Oh, all right, boy. You have convinced me. I shall stay and help you." With a large grin, the whiskered boy smiled and spoke in a loud voice. "Great, then I want you to promise me 4 things." This made Kaguya inwardly sigh. What was he going to ask for promises of wealth and glory? He took a deep breath and spoke in a calmer tone. "First, you will teach me and nurture my growth. Second, you will never lie to me. Third, you will protect me from my enemies, no matter who they may be or if they use arms or politics to hurt me. Finally, you will always be with me and follow me as my shadow." The silver-haired woman was silent for a few moments as she thought in her mind, "This boy is interesting." For the first time in a long time she smiled and spoke. "I agree. Our contract is now made." She touched his, and in a flash of light, the rabbit goddess was now bonded with the child of prophecy. Years later, the 14-year-old Naruto was walking to the academy, a large smile on his face, as happy as can be. "Like always," spoke a disembodied feminine voice, to which he replied, "and for good reason, sensei. You've taught me a lot." His shadow stopped following his movements as it glided onto the adjacent wall. The blonde walked alongside as a pair of lavender-colored eyes appeared on the shadow. It was his sensei, Kaguya Otsutsuki, whom bound herself to him by becoming his shadow. This allowed her to take on a semi-solid form in both her natural form and as his shadow. Ever since then she had taught him to read, write, math, science, history, and more. She was always patient with him. Even when he struggled with something, she would persevere until he got it. He always enjoyed listening to her lessons. She still has not told him anything about her past nor about what she did. He once by accident called her mother. When he did, a sour look appeared on her face and said to never call her by such an honorable title. He smiled at how close they were. He freely admitted that she was his closest friend and confidante. He had one other friend who was a tad odd, but that's for later. During his time at the academy, his sensei noticed the special treatment one Sasuke Uchiha got day in and day out, and the discrimination Naruto constantly faced. Even that Uruka Yamino guy discriminated against the boy with his complacency. Uruka knew Naruto couldn't pull off the clone technique due to the blonde's unnaturally potent chakra. Fortunately, Kaguya fixed this by teaching him the shadow clone technique. At long last, the two arrived at the academy classroom, hopefully for the last time. Kaguya was a patient woman and even taught patience to her charge. But having to listen to the same exact boring lectures over and over really got on their nerves. They couldn't wait for this farce to be over. The blonde sat down next to one Shikamaru Nara. Shikamaru and Naruto had a decent enough friendship. They occasionally skipped class together to take naps or play shogi. Once they engaged in an intense game of shogi. When the blonde first started playing, his sensei assisted him by whispering instructions into his ear. As Naruto got better, he discovered he was actually highly adaptive and intelligent. Their most intense and epic match stretched on for nearly 6 hours. It ended in a stalemate. To Nara's losing or even hitting a stalemate in shogi to someone outside the clan made that person a Nara would treat as a lifelong friend, even if it proves troublesome. The blonde scanned the classroom for his other friends. There was Choji Akamichi. He and Naruto engaged in an eating contest, and somehow the blonde managed to out-eat the chubby boy. This made them become fast friends. Naruto glanced at one Shino Aburame. They were associates at least. Neither the blonde or goddess knew how to categorize the bug user. Shino was polite and greeted Naruto often with the utmost courtesy. Perhaps because the Aburame clan were somewhat akin to outcasts due to their line, that Shino understood Naruto to a degree. Then there was Kiba and Yuzuka. The blonde teen often brawled with the dog boy, mostly because they both wanted to be number one. Despite their fights, it's of a friendly competition. He also occasionally visited the Inuzuka compound. The matriarch Tsume was very courteous and nice to him. Then, Sasuke Uchiha. Needless to say, they hated each other with a passion. Sasuke had a big stick up his ass. Not to mention, Sasuke had a particular joy in bullying and tormenting the blonde for whatever reason. The blonde wasn't sure if there was even a specific reason. Perhaps Sasuke just needed a punching bag to make himself feel better. Regardless, Naruto considered Sasuke his academy archenemy. Now comes the girls. Ino and Sakura were fangirls, though Kaguya mentioned it was either because they were simply following a crowd or that for whatever reason they latched onto and placed their affections on the wrong sort of person, namely Sasuke. Finally, one Hinata Hyuga. Naruto wasn't sure how to feel about her. On the one hand, she hadn't done anything to earn his ire, but neither did she try to earn his friendship. Perhaps she was just shy or scared around him to attempt communicating with him. Uruka entered the classroom with his assistant Mizuki. The two handed out the written tests out to the students. Naruto inwardly laughed as his shadow stretched across from him and observed the contents of the paper. The rabbit goddess was less than impressed. The questions were exceedingly simple. What was the Shodame's name? Seriously, what a joke. In less than 3 minutes, Naruto had already finished. Now he had to wait for everyone else to finish, so decided to mess with Sasuke a little. He whispered to his sensei to unbutton the Uchiha's pants. Sure, it was a childish trick, but the look on Sasuke's face would be worth it. Kaguya normally had a serious disposition, but she wasn't without a sense of humor, so she decided to indulge her student today since she was in a decent enough mood. She skimmed across the floor like a serpent, her movements unseen by all. She then with pristine speed and care unbuttoned the brat's shorts and went back to her charge and gave him a thumbs up. Kaguya glanced about and saw that Shikamaru, Shino, and surprisingly Hinata saw her movements. Fortunately, she and Naruto already worked out a story. Their story was Naruto has a line that allows his shadow to move independently and even interact with objects, defend and attack. She whispered the identities of his witnesses and the blonde smirked, knowing that this might happen, though it could still work in his favor. Meanwhile, in the Hokage office a number of Jonin were there to make requests for their teams. Hiruzen listened intently to each one and gave either a nod of approval or denied it and reevaluated the teams. There were only 3 left. Asuma Sarutobi took a drag from his cigarette as he spoke. I request Ino Yamanaka, Shikamaru Nara, and Choji Akamichi. The Sandem nodded in approval at the possibility of the next generation being as effective as the previous. Kurenai Yui spoke next. I request Shino Aburame, Hinata Hyuga, and Kiba Inuzuka. Hiruzen HM'd for a brief moment before nodding. Then unexpectedly Anko Mitarashi spoke up. Give me Naruto Uzumaki as an apprentice. Everyone in the room jaw dropped at that. Not just because she rudely spoke to the Hokage, but also because she wanted the Kyuubi Jinchuriki of all people. No one could figure out what was going through her head, except one person who sported a small smile. Kakashi, with his nose stuck in his pornography, said, Ma, why you want him? Why do you even want to teach at all? Ankoch and the snake mistress put her hands in her trench coat pockets and replied, it's not any of your business. Crap for brains. I just feel like it. Besides, it's not like you're gonna take him. And call me Chan again and I'll feed you your testicles after slow roasting them and baste them in white wine. All of the men who heard that subconsciously either tightened their belts or put a hand over their S in fear. The masked Jonin nervously chuckled as he spoke. On the contrary, I do. I actually was going to request Sasuke Uchiha, Sakura Haruno, and Naruto Uzumaki. In anger at this, Anko grabbed him by the collar and gave him a swift headbutt, breaking the cartilage in his nose, creating a sickening snap noise. The former student of the Yondaime howled in pain, clutching his broken nose as the T&I specialist spoke. Go to hell, headache. I know you'll just ignore Naruto and Sakura and simply focus on the Uchiha brat. You want that Doom team, you're going to have to fight me for it. Kakashi was about to throw a punch, but Hiruzen stepped in before things got too out of control. Enough. I propose a compromise. You'll each take on Naruto for a month. Whomever proves a better teacher shall be his sensei. Kakashi shall take the first month. The Sandame had to admit he didn't like being put in this position. But he still had to keep some form of order, and besides, even if the boy went to Anko, that wouldn't be so bad. He needed the boy weak at first, then gradually strengthened. He'd wait and see how this played out. The snake mistress let out a huff and muttered fine before storming out, leaving a very shocked group of Jonin and a very angry ex-Anbu back with Naruto. The kunai test was over and now it was time for sparring. When Sasuke got up from his seat in class, he tripped over his pants and laid flat on the floor for all to see. On a side note, he had poor taste in underwear. Very poor. Now Naruto watched the spars. When it came to the civilian kids, their performance was rather boring, just a brawler style. The fangirls were even worse. It mostly involved scratching, hair pulling, and so on. Shikamaru and Choji were paired up. Surprisingly, the latter forfeited before the Nara, and even said it was too troublesome stealing the Nara clan's signature line. Shino went against Kiba. The former held his own for a while, but lost due to the Inuzuka's proficiency in Taijutsu. Sakura went against Hinata. It went in a draw. Sakura felt bad for Hinata and would have felt like some kind of villain for hitting her, and Hinata was, well, Hinata, too gentle and shy for her own good. Ino went against some civilian kid who she dropped with a judo leg kick, then pushed him out of the ring. Kaguya noted the girl likely was taught this by her father. Finally, it came down to Naruto and Sasuke, the two glaring daggers at each other, wanting to pound each other to a white pulp. The two entered the arena. His sensei whispered to him, don't show off your full power yet. Make it look like you put in a great amount of effort. The blonde muttered a simple yes and proceeded to get into the basic academy stance. Until Sasuke spoke. HMPH, why even bother? Both me and everyone else knows I'm going to win. I am an Uchiha and you are just a stupid orphan who holds no value. The blonde bristled in anger, but Kaguya whispered assurances and warned him to keep calm. But Sasuke had to keep going. I bet your parents didn't even want you. Your mother must have been a slut that screwed half of Konoha, then by a freak accident got knocked up. Then you slithered out of her filth. Both Naruto and his sensei knew that wasn't true. The latter then spoke to her charge. Forget what I said. Beat him up. The whiskered teen cracked his knuckles and then spoke. This coming from a brat spoon-fed everything he wants and throws a tantrum when you don't get your way. Boo-hoo. Cry me a river. I lost my clan and family, so I'm going to leech off of Konoha and do what I want to make myself feel like a bigger man. Get over yourself. The Uchiha charged in anger, though to the blonde with his sensei's training it was like slow motion. The Jinchuriki couldn't decide between fast and clean or slow and why. For the sake of time he went with the former, since putting the Uchiha in the air would be more trouble than it was worth. So he simply grabbed Sasuke's arm, jumped off the ground and locked his legs around Sasuke's neck, putting the Uchiha in a chokehold as the blonde's back rested on the ground. The self-proclaimed Avenger tried to struggle, but he couldn't get any leverage on the blonde, nor could he focus from his oxygen being cut off. Naruto had the instinct to snap the Uchiha's neck due to his Uzumaki heritage, but refrained from doing so on account of giving the civilian and elder councils more ammo to use against him. After a few more seconds of struggle, the Uchiha had passed out. The blonde released a leg lock and walked towards the stunned crowd. With that done, next came the jutsu exam. 3 hours passed and it finally came down to Naruto. Iruka sighed, already preparing the failed stamp. With a ferocious gleam in his eye, Naruto performed the substitution. And in place of where the blonde stood was a shower, with the curtains revealing the silhouette of a young woman. "Hey, where's my water? Not funny, love." The curtain was pulled aside, revealing a young ebony-skinned woman. She glanced at the two Chunin and shrieked as she pulled the curtain back into place. "Damn you, Naruto, this isn't funny." The blonde reappeared and chuckled darkly. "That'll teach you not to block your boyfriend and dictate his writing schedule with your nice body, kitty cat." The woman in the shower yelled out, "Okay, you win, just send me back. Tell my boyfriend I'll do whatever he wants for the weekend." Naruto laughed heartily as he snapped his fingers, sending the shower and woman back to wherever he got her from. Naruto 1, Hyana 0. After a few minutes, the Chunin recovered from their nosebleeds. Then the blonde performed the henge and transformed into his sensei, making the two Chunin wonder how the brat came up with such a regal-looking and beautiful woman. Finally, the blonde performed the shadow clone jutsu, creating 10 perfect copies of himself. The Chunin jaw dropped at this and stood stunned. Naruto then pried the failed stamp out of Iruka's hand and stamped their foreheads with it and left with a triumphant smile on his face. Meanwhile, somewhere in Konoha, a lone woman sat by herself, sitting in a large glass box. A number of seals laced around it to reinforce the glass to the proportion of solid steel, and seals to absorb and suppress chakra. The woman's violet eyes shined in the dark as her matted and greasy red hair stuck to her face. She hummed a small lullaby to herself as she drew a picture of a young boy with whisker marks on his face. It was Kushina, drawing what she believed her son to look like now. Thousands of drawings were strewn about her prison, covering the floor, the walls, the tables, and everywhere in between. A bell rang as a small opened, producing a simple meal on a tray. She slowly devoured it, though most of her attention was focused on finishing her drawing of the day. In truth, she had been drawing them to occupy herself and, more importantly, keep a general track of the days. By her count, it was around graduation time, and Naruto would be getting his head bent soon. When she was done with the meal, she went over to the toilet and hanged her head over it. With a maniacal look in her eyes, she pinched her uvula to stimulate her gag reflex and puked up the contents of her stomach. When she was certain there was nothing left, she looked at her reflection in the glass. She had lost so much weight, she was now mostly skin and skeleton. Her ribs were visible, her skin had sunken in. She was beautiful once, and can be again. It will be time to escape soon. Very soon. Her captors will pay for taking her child. Oh yes, they're all gonna die. Soon it'll be time to take scalps and slit throats. She muttered to herself and resumed her drawing. It was early in the morning. At about 6:30 a.m. alone Anbu sighed as he took the steps down to the Uzumaki horse cage. He had walked up and down these stairs ever since her capture. A very small handful of Anbu were aware of this place, but they were all sworn to utter silence in the name of increasing Konoha's power. And for some reason their captive has never attempted to escape. She just sat there drawing those pictures of her son. It was actually creepy in both the detail and how close the pictures resemble the real thing. He shook his head as he opened the iron door to where the glass cell was kept. "Morning. Ready for another day of 20 questions and torture?" he asked as he approached the cell. He was only greeted by silence, which wasn't unusual. The Uzumaki would often never reply back or create a number of piles of paper and hide under one, waiting to scare the crap out of him, which often worked. When he got close enough, he noticed that there were no piles of drawings today or even a sign of her. He looked up and down, searching for her, only to find there was no Kushina. His eyes bugged out from the eye holes in his mask as he let out a girlish scream that sounded like the evil Uzumaki has escaped. An hour and a half later. "What do you mean? She just wasn't here," screamed Hiruzen at the top of his lungs in outrage at the apparent escape. The Anbu simply replied in a panicked tone, "It is just as I told you. I checked on her last night before lights out. I came back this morning according to my schedule and she wasn't in the damn cell." Jiraiya scowled angrily. "Bullshit, she was here last night. Stands to reason she would be here in the morning. I put nearly every kind of seal I could think of on here to keep her inside chakra drainage, chakra restrictions, anti-sealing seals, and you're saying she just vanished?" The Anbu that was put on the spot was reduced to a blubbering mess until another one spoke up. "Hokage-sama, Jiraiya-sama, we found something. But it doesn't make sense." The two turned to the second Anbu, expecting an explanation. "We found traces of vomit on the toilet. We think she was puking up her meals." Repeatedly, the Sandaime raised an eyebrow at that. "Why the hell would she do that?" In response, a third Anbu spoke up. "I think I know why." They turned and found the small food was slightly ajar. On closer inspection, it appeared that the gears were jammed by a paper kunai. Then it slammed itself shut once something crawled through. "Did she make herself upchuck her meals so she could fit into that tiny?" "Who the hell does that?" the Toad Salmon asked in apparent shock, to which his sensei answered, "Either someone truly desperate or insane. Put the Anbu on full alert and get Danzo and his personal guard. If he asks, tell him that Kushina has escaped." Jiraiya jaw dropped at that as he asked Danzo full alert, but Isn't that extreme? In response to that, Hiruzen slapped his student across the face and screamed, reaching his boiling point, extreme is what we need. Have you gone soft? Have you forgotten who Kushina is? She is the evil Uzumaki. She takes scalps, slits throats, and boils testicles into a stew. She is merciless. She doesn't feel anything. She doesn't feel pain, or sorrow, or remorse, or guilt the way other people do. She isn't even human enough to understand the concept of fear. And right now, this monster is on the loose waiting to strike if she gets to a foreign village. Konoha as we know it is doomed. She has been trapped for years in here and has reduced herself to skin and bones. We must hunt her down and end this now before she regains her full strength, and if she does, then I fear there is no force in the elemental nations that could stop her. That last part was spoken in pure fear. Jiraiya could only nod, knowing their options were too few and they had no time to find others. For Kushina was more than a kunoichi. She was an unstoppable force of nature, with the soul of a monster. Meanwhile, somewhere in Konoha, a red-haired woman was slurping down and gobbling up virtually every bit of food within reach at a local diner. The other customers had a sinking feeling they all knew her from somewhere. The answer was on the very tip of their tongues, but they were too afraid to consider the possibility the evil Uzumaki still lived. In the corner table, Kushina gobbled up a large stack of pancakes and quickly scarfed it down whole. Nutrients from the various foods quickly flooded into her, filling out her body and muscles in minutes, which would take weeks or even months to recover. What her sealing expertise cut that problem out. A napkin and a bit of problem solved. With a very loud belch, she had finished eating and leaned back into her seat, cleaning out her teeth with a toothpick. She was out. She was finally out. Now she needed a plan. Seeing her son was too direct. Chances are there were Anbu there, waiting for her. Plus, there was obviously the possibility her son could reject her after all these years. The borders were likely guarded, so she can't leave Konoha unless she fought her way out. And even then it would be less than desirable to deal with so many of the Hokage idiot drones. But then, an idea struck her, something she had wanted to do for a very long time: go straight at Konoha's jugular. She got up from her seat and was about to exit the diner until the cook, an older and greasy-looking man, called out, "Can't leave till you pay, missy." The red-haired woman groaned as she turned around. Then a look of recognition came across her face. "I know you. You were an academy teacher that was touching little girls." The greasy cook grunted as he spoke. "Yeah. And because of that, Kushina, my ass were cut off and I was locked up." "What is it to?" He was interrupted as she marched up to him, grabbed one of the tableware forks and then stabbed him in the neck. "You piece of shit. I stab, will stab, teach, stab you to stab, not touch, stab girls," she screamed as she stabbed him over and over again in the neck. When she was finished, she giggled as she muttered, "Now I got ink pigs on my feet." She laughed as she got up and exited the diner as the clerk called for help. The next morning, the Sandim sighed tiredly. It had been a very long night. His Anbu and Danzo's route had looked up, down, left, right, sideways, frontwards, backwards, round and round. Konoha for Kushina. They looked all over the borders, in and around Naruto's apartment. Then she was reported being at some random diner in the center of Konoha, and still she gave them all the slip. Kushina had certainly earned her reputation for being extraordinarily slippery and difficult to catch. The only reason they had captured her in the first place was due to her knocking on death's door. Hell, they didn't even expect her to survive, and now she was running rampant throughout Konoha. She has killed one already, and now it was a matter of time before she did something truly crazy. Something so crazy that no shinobi in their right mind, not even a Kage, would think of doing it. Something like, Hokage-sama the daimyo and his family has been murdered. That, at the received news, Hiruzen fainted dead away. In the daimyo palace, Jiraiya and Danzo both sighed. "We should have seen this one coming a mile away. Killing a daimyo is pretty much taboo amongst shinobi everywhere," spoke Danzo as he shook his head, fearing the worst possible scenario. "Forget that, damn it. The other daimyos are going to be asking questions on what the hell happened. What do we tell them? Sorry about the fire daimyo and his family's deaths. They were all killed by a psychopathic ex-Jinchuriki," questioned the Toad Sannin in a rather girlish voice, his S contracting into him from fear of what was going to happen to Konoha. Danzo hemmed in thought. Telling the other daimyos the truth was an option that could placate them enough to not tear apart Konoha financially. What would be better would be if there was. Danzo-sama, Jiraiya-sama, and Anbu shouted as he pointed out a survivor. The elder's single eye widened at the sight. A young woman was stumbling down the hall, clumsily wrapped bandages covering her head. And in her hands was a pile of skin and flesh. It was a face. The various Anbu gaped in shock, and a few lost their dinner at the sight. "Jack v hitch, Jifakov vfx that. She cut off my face," the woman gurgled underneath the bandages as she fell to her knees. She was helped up by a cat-masked Anbu who was truly horrified. She wasn't told any specific details, only that a psychopath rogue nin was in Konoha. "Vigukagal vash Jipuk vfx, my beautiful face. She took my face," the girl gurgled under the bandages. No one could understand what she was saying, but knew it involved her face getting cut off. She was escorted out by Nico and a number of other Anbu. The Toad Sannin asked who the hell was that, a servant girl. The elder, however, replied, "No. I think she could be a daughter of the daimyo. If she is, she could help us get this all sorted out." Are you kidding me, Danzo? Did you not see her? Her face is all but gone. What if she ends up in a mental hospital? Yelped the Sannin, his nerves unable to take any more stress. A damaged daimyo is better than none at all. Without an actual daimyo or even a figurehead, the other daimyos will swoop in like vultures and tear Konoha apart, piece by piece, both politically and financially. At this, Juria sighed in defeat and muttered, "Let's pray she doesn't tear us apart." The next morning, the Sandaime was at the hospital. His primary duty was to oversee the health of this person and see if she could provide any information. From what his old rival gathered, this girl was supposedly an illegitimate daughter of the daimyo, but was kept close by in case he couldn't produce any other heirs. The approaching doctor gulped nervously as he spoke. "It is. Gulp, very bad, Hokage-sama." The Sandaime grumbled tiredly how bad. The doctor looked over the file and replied, "Well, her face was beyond saving. Not even skin grafts could help restore her face. I fear she will forever live underneath a mask of bandages." Hiruzen pinched the bridge of his nose and then asked, in fear of the answer, "How is she doing?" The doctor had a more relaxed posture as he replied with more confidence, surprisingly stable. "Angry as hell at the loss of her face, but this anger is directed almost solely at her attacker." Hiruzen made a thinking pose. If that were correct, he could use that to his advantage to get the rolling. He nodded to himself and entered the patient's room. Said patient was staring at a handheld mirror, growling in anger to the loss of her once beautiful face. "Excuse me, MS." He left the sentence hanging, not knowing her name. She growled again as she spoke. "If you are going to address your new daimyo, then at least know her name." "Idiot. And my name is Kara. Don't you forget it either." The Sandaime nodded, careful not to invoke her anger anymore. "Of course, daimyo-sama. I am here to ask what happened." She placed the mirror down, got up from her bed and slowly walked towards the window, placing a hand against the glass. "It all happened so damn fast. I was in my room, reading one of my books. Then I heard wet splattering sounds. I went to investigate, and all of our samurai were dead. All dead. Then, she appeared behind me. That crazy woman with red hair. She took my face. She cut off my face, then peeled it off." She screamed as she punched the glass, making it crack. The Sandaime then said, "Please calm yourself, don't aggravate your wounds." "Did she say anything?" The new daimyo nursed her Y-knuckles as she replied, "I think she might have said something about settling a score in Oto." The Hokage's eyes snapped wide open at that. Oto was a new minor village, but rumors persisted that it had some affiliation with his old student Orochimaru. He and Kushina had bad for years on end. The last words she had spoken to them before he became a missing nin were, "If I ever catch you, I will kill you and take your scalp as a trophy." There was no doubt in his mind that Kushina was on a mission and nothing was going to stop her till she succeeded. Normally he would be satisfied if they killed each other, but he doubted that his old student would be able to hold a candle to the Uzumaki, who was significantly more ferocious and skilled than Orochimaru, whom used his honeyed words and cunning to his advantage. He would send Juria to look into this. With luck, the Toad Sannin could find her before she could regain her full strength. A bunch of civilians and samurai was one thing, a daimyo was just plain insanity, but a Sannin he doubted she could handle in her current state. "Hokage Dono, I do not care what it takes, or what it costs. Find me this woman and bring her to me alive or dead. Whatever you need. You've got a blank check." The girl spoke as tears rolled down from her eyes and over her covered face. At this the Hokage nodded and said, "Thank you. I promise to get this wrapped up quickly. I shall assign some ambu to you until samurai from the land of iron can arrive." The girl was quiet for a moment, then said, "I want that Nico ambu." The Sandaime nodded, knowing that Nico was reliable enough for the job. "Consider it done, daimyo-sama." He spoke in a professional tone. She nodded and gave him a dismissive wave. With a bow he left the room, leaving the girl on her own. Once he was gone, the girl resumed staring into the handheld mirror. This time a crazed smile appeared between the bandages. Days later. It has been a week since the daimyo incident. Many details were kept from the general population of Konoha. Word hadn't reached anyone outside Konoha's borders yet, though it was only a matter of time. The public story was that an unknown and psychotic missing nin somehow sneaked in and killed the daimyo family, servants, and samurai. Only one girl escaped. The daimyo's daughter Kara managed to survive but was horrifically scarred. In the apartment of Naruto he was sitting and reading the newspaper. Damn. Whoever did this was brutal to say the least. A pair of lavender-colored eyes appeared from his shadow as Kaguya spoke. "Indeed. Killing a daimyo has extreme consequences. The daimyos may own the lands and provide much funding to the shinobi village's budget. They have little power outside the political realm. It is feared that if one daimyo was killed, then they would all panic for their lives and pull the plug on the shinobi villages. So it became a silent rule to never kill a daimyo unless certain conditions were met. And I highly doubt a psychopath would go through all this trouble for no apparent reason." Her charge nodded as he mumbled, "True enough. I heard a rumor that the new daimyo is being introduced to the councils today." Meanwhile at the council chambers, Kara sat in a chair, sighing at the endless introductions and offers of sympathy to the loss of her family and face. From what she could tell from the civilians and elders, it was to simply suck up to her, hoping to win her favor. The shinobi were at least genuine, knowing friends and family who had suffered loss of loved ones or victims of some kind of disfigurement. The daimyo yawned tiredly as she listened to the ramblings of the civilian council. It was honestly boring and tedious. It usually involved putting taxes on the shinobi equipment stores and the like, which the shinobi council were obviously against. With a sigh of boredom and wanting this to end, she raised her hand to silence them. A series of hushes went about as they all looked at her, waiting for her word. The daimyo sat up and spoke in a nonchalant tone of voice, as though the proceedings meant nothing to her Hokage dono. A question, what kind of village is this? The Sandame's mouth opened and closed in confusion. Pardon me, daimyo-sama, but what do you mean? Asked Hayashi Hyuga with a raised eyebrow, very much interested in her meaning. Exactly as I said. It is a simple question. What kind of village is Konoha? Asked the daimyo again with more emphasis. This time Hiruzen was able to make a coherent sentence. A shinobi village, of course, daimyo-sama. She nodded at that and began pacing as she spoke. That is correct. A shinobi village, where shinobi are meant to live, where shinobi rule. Suuo. Why does a council of civilians exist? The scarred daimyo glared dangerously at the aged Hokage. To assist in dealing with trade amongst the civilian clientele, replied a nervous Hiruzen. The daimyo nodded, accepting the answer as she spoke. True. They are supposed to deal with civilian matters, since they themselves are civilians. Suo. Why, are they imposing taxes on shinobi shops and equipment? At this the room fell deathly silent. The elders and Sandame gaped, unsure of how to answer that. The shinobi muttered amongst themselves in silent agreement. Why should civilians dictate the prices of valuable shinobi gear that Genin and Chunin often need in the field? The shinobi don't dictate the prices of clothing or beauty and hygiene products the civilians buy daily. So, how is it fair? I would like to ask the same question, spoke one Sum, angrily glaring at the civilians, whom were mumbling amongst themselves. But this is a democracy, daimyo-sama, so we get an equal say, spoke some man with pink hair. Are you saying that civilians should get an equal say, and yet shinobi should not? If it is a democracy, then doesn't everyone have a voice? Asked the daimyo in an increasingly dangerous tone, with one Chusa slamming his fists on the table. It's true. Why should you get an equal say but not let us use ours? Why should you control what happens in a shinobi village? At that the room exploded in cries of accusations and rage. Hiruzen tried so desperately to quell the chaos, but the daimyo relaxed into her chair and casually folded her hands, watching the ensuing pandemonium with silent glee. From next to her, the Anbu called Nico looked at the daimyo in a curious manner. The way this daimyo addressed the civilian shinobi status quo reminded her of her sensei. Could she have? No, that is crazy even for her. Unless, but, the face, and, did she cut off someone else's face and passed off for someone else, then put the doctors in some kind of jinjutsu? This. She must be, the Anbu thought inside her mind, clenching and unclenching her fists. At last Kara clapped her hands and said in a jovial tone, how about this? To settle all grievances, the members of the civilian council, out of pocket, pays reparations to the shinobi clans for overstepping their boundaries by unfairly pricing shinobi-centric shops and goods. The clan heads looked at one another and all nodded in agreement to this solution, while the civilians looked mortified. But daimyo-sama, you can't just do that. We would have to pay in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions. The scarred daimyo glared at them and asked, excuse me, did you just tell me what I couldn't do? I am your goddamn daimyo. If I say black is white, then it is. Now pay what is owed, or every last bit of your possessions will each go to a clan of my choosing. Is that clear? She screamed at the very top of her lungs. With that, all the civilian council could do was slump into their seats in defeat, for the orders of a daimyo were absolute. With a huff, the daimyo exited the chamber so she could retire to her private chambers, Nico following close behind her. I can't remember the last time we had such a proactive daimyo, spoke Inoichi with admiration in his voice, which earned nods of agreement from his colleagues. Outside the daimyo, Kara stretched and muttered, I always liked Moonflower's Nekasen. The Anbu stopped in her tracks, knowing the meaning of her words, and muttered, not many know about that. Who are you? The daimyo grinned underneath the wrappings. Sensing no one was nearby, she partially removed the wrapping, revealing smooth, unmarked, and beautiful skin underneath and tufts of freshly cut crimson hair. Hey there, Yugeachan. Been a while. Yugao fell to her knees and mumbled in shock, "It is you, sensei." But how the fake daimyo waved a finger, then slapped the Anbu across the face, making her fall to the floor as her mask fell off. Then her face was pinned to the floor by her sensei's foot, a vicious gleam in her eye. Haven't changed a bit. But what is this for? The purple-haired woman asked in an odd mix of nostalgia and fear. Kushina's partially revealed face gave off a wicked grin as she asked in a rather demonic tone, simple. Would you care to explain to me why you are copulating with someone besides my son, and why haven't any of you taken care of my own child? Your answers had better be good. I entrusted my child to all of you, and you didn't care for him. That makes me question if my trust was misplaced. I don't like liars and traitors. Yugao shivered in fear, knowing that a wrong answer could cost her her very life, and that her sensei can arrange it to look like an accident. Okay, sadly the chapter is over, and if you enjoyed, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.